It is September 17th, 1996, a Tuesday morning in Meridian, Mississippi, and the late summer heat has not yet broken. The air sits thick and still over the residential streets south of downtown, where live oak trees cast uneven shadows across cracked sidewalks and modest single-story homes line up shoulder to shoulder with chain-link fences and carports. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler clicks rhythmically. A dog barks twice and goes quiet. The morning has the drowsy, unhurried quality of a town that has been awake for an hour but is not yet fully committed to the day. Meridian in 1996 is a city of 41,000 pressed into the pine hills of eastern Mississippi, where the highways cross and the rail lines meet. It is a place defined by what it used to be, a manufacturing hub, a railroad town, and what it is learning to become in the slow economic shift of the late 20th century. People work at the hospital, at the remaining factories, at the car dealerships along the highway. Children attend neighborhood schools. Families go to church on Sunday. It is not a wealthy place, but it is a familiar one, with the particular rhythms of the deep South, front porches, long afternoons, everyone knowing someone who knows everyone else. On Magnolia Street, a narrow residential road 3 blocks south of the public library, the Harper family has lived since 1989. The house is a pale green wood-frame structure with a screened porch and a magnolia tree in the front yard that blooms white every spring and drops waxy petals across the grass in summer. Michael Harper works third shift at a poultry processing plant 20 minutes outside town. His wife, Denise, works part-time at a dry cleaner on Highway 80. They have 3 children, Marcus, 14, Tanya, 10, and Brittany, who is 7 years old, and who, on that Tuesday morning, is standing on the front porch in her school uniform waiting for the bus. Brittany, Nicole Harper, is small for her age, with dark braided hair pulled back with bright purple barrettes, her favorite color, and a gap where her 2 front teeth used to be. She lost them both in the same week in August and has been learning to whistle through the space ever since, much to the irritation of her older siblings. She is wearing the khaki skirt and white polo shirt required by Highland Park Elementary, and she is carrying a backpack with a stuffed cat keychain hanging from the zipper. Her mother made her breakfast, eggs and toast, and told her to wait on the porch until the bus came up the street, because Denise had to leave for her shift in 10 minutes and couldn't wait with her. Marcus and Tanya had already left for the middle school. Michael was asleep upstairs after his overnight shift. Brittany stood on the porch and watched a cat cross the yard 2 houses down. At 7:42 in the morning, Denise came out onto the porch with her purse and her work keys. She kissed Brittany on the top of her head and reminded her to sit with her usual seat partner on the bus. She told her she would pick her up from aftercare at 5,030, like always. Brittany said, "Okay," and Denise walked to her car in the driveway, backed out onto Magnolia Street, and drove toward the highway. She looked back once in her rearview mirror and saw Brittany sitting on the top step of the porch, swinging her legs. At 7,051, a neighbor 3 houses down, a woman named Mrs. Eloise Crawford, who had lived on Magnolia Street since 1964, stepped onto her own porch to water the ferns she kept in hanging baskets. She looked down the street and saw Brittany Harper still sitting on the porch. She waved. Brittany waved back. Mrs. Crawford went inside to refill her watering can. When she came back out 2 minutes later, the Harper porch was empty. The school bus turned onto Magnolia Street at 7:58. The driver, a man named Vernon Ellis who had been driving the Highland Park route for 6 years, pulled up to the Harper house and opened the door. No child was waiting. He honked twice, as was his practice when a regular rider wasn't visible. No one came out. He waited 30 seconds, noted the absence in his log, and continued down the route. Michael Harper woke at 9,015 to the sound of his phone ringing. It was the school attendance office calling to report that Brittany had not arrived for first period. Michael, confused and still half asleep, told the woman on the phone that Brittany had been waiting for the bus when his wife left at 7:45. The woman said the bus driver reported she was not at the stop. Michael hung up and went downstairs calling Brittany's name. The house was empty. He went out onto the porch. The street was quiet. Her backpack was not there. Her shoes were not by the door. He called Denise at work. She said she had left Brittany on the porch at 7,043. She said Brittany had been fine. Michael hung up and called 911. The call was logged at 9,022 in the morning. Brittany Nicole Harper, 7 years old, wearing a white polo shirt and khaki skirt with purple barrettes in her braided hair, had been on her front porch 15 minutes earlier. Now she was gone. The Meridian Police Department dispatched 2 patrol officers to Magnolia Street within 8 minutes of the call. Officer Raymond Cobb and Officer Lisa Trent arrived at 9,030. Michael Harper met them on the front porch, still in the t-shirt and sweatpants he had slept in, his voice rising as he tried to explain what he knew and what he didn't. Denise arrived 10 minutes later, having left work immediately, her face already set in the particular expression of a parent who understands that something has gone wrong but has not yet allowed herself to think the word abduction. Officer Trent walked the perimeter of the property while Cobb took Michael and Denise's statements on the porch. Trent noted that the yard was open to the street. No gate, no fence, just a low hedge along the sidewalk. The backyard had a chain-link fence enclosing a small grass area. The gate was latched from the inside. No signs of forced entry into the house, no signs of struggle in the yard. Cobb asked Michael if Brittany would have gone with a stranger. Michael said no. He said she knew not to. He said she had been taught not to get in cars, not to talk to people she didn't know. Denise, sitting on the porch steps, said the same thing. Then she stopped and said, "But she's 7. If someone nice-looking asked her a question, she might answer." Officer Cobb radioed for a detective. By 10,015, Detective Andrew Marsh from the Criminal Investigations Division arrived. Marsh was 42, a 17-year veteran who had worked 2 prior child abduction cases in Lauderdale County, one of which had ended in recovery and one of which had not. He conducted a second, more detailed interview with Michael and Denise, establishing a precise timeline. 7,043 a.m., Denise left for work, Brittany on porch. 7,005 a.m., Mrs. Crawford saw Brittany on porch, waved. 7,005 a.m. Approximate, Mrs. Crawford went inside. 7,058 a.m., school bus arrived, no child present. Somewhere in that 7-minute window between 7:51 and 7:58, Brittany had left the porch or been taken from it. Detective Marsh walked down the street to Mrs. Crawford's house. She was 71, sharp-minded, and visibly distressed. She confirmed that she had seen Brittany sitting on the porch steps at approximately 7:51. She had waved. Brittany had waved back. She had gone inside briefly, perhaps 2 minutes, no more. When she came back out, the porch was empty. She had assumed Brittany had gone inside the house. Marsh asked if she had seen any vehicles on the street during that time. Mrs. Crawford thought for a moment. Then she said, "A van." There had been a van parked farther down the block, near the corner of Magnolia and Elm. A white van, older model. She had not paid it much attention because service vans and work trucks were common in the neighborhood. She did not know if it had still been there when she came back outside. Marsh noted this. By 11:00, the Meridian police had activated a full missing child protocol. Additional units were dispatched to canvass the neighborhood. Residents on Magnolia Street and the surrounding blocks were interviewed. Had anyone seen Brittany that morning? Had anyone noticed unfamiliar vehicles, unfamiliar people, anything unusual? A door-to-door canvass produces a handful of observations. A man 2 blocks over remembered seeing a white van, possibly a Dodge or Chevy, parked near the corner of Magnolia and Elm early that morning, maybe around 7,040. He had been walking his dog and had noticed it because the van's side panel had some kind of logo or lettering on it, though he could not recall what it said. Another neighbor, a woman on Elm Street, thought she had seen a white van driving slowly through the neighborhood the previous afternoon, Monday, September 16th, but she was not certain it was the same vehicle. The white van became the primary lead. At 12:30 p.m., the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation was contacted. At 1:15 p.m., the FBI's Jackson Field office was notified under federal kidnapping statutes. By 2:00, search dogs had arrived from the state police K-9 unit. The dogs were given one of Brittany's shirts from the laundry hamper. They were to the yard, the porch, and the street. The scent trail went from the porch to the sidewalk and ended at the curb in front of the house. The lead handler looked at Detective Marsh and said what Marsh already knew. Vehicle pickup. The child had gotten into a vehicle or been forced into one. The Meridian Police Department established a command center in a conference room at the station. Phone lines were set up for a tip hotline. Press releases went out by 3:30 p.m. Local television stations interrupted programming with breaking news alerts. By the evening news cycle, Brittany's school photo, the picture from the previous spring, her hair in neat braids, her smile showing the gap where her front teeth had been, was broadcast across Mississippi and into neighboring states. Denise Harper appeared on camera at a 6:30 p.m. press conference, flanked by Michael and Detective Marsh. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. She said, "If someone has my baby, please bring her home. She's just 7 years old. She needs her family. Please." The white van sightings generated dozens of calls overnight. Every white van in Lauderdale County and the surrounding counties was flagged. Officers stopped and inspected 17 vehicles matching the general description in the first 24 hours. None produced evidence. None belonged to anyone with a prior record. None had any visible connection to Brittany Harper. On Wednesday morning, September 18th, the search expanded. Volunteers assembled at Highland Park Elementary's parking lot. Parents, church members, off-duty officers, people who had simply seen the news and wanted to help. They were organized into grid search teams and sent into the wooded areas south of town, along the railroad tracks, through the abandoned industrial lots near the old mill. Helicopters from the Mississippi Highway Patrol circled overhead. By Thursday, the story had reached regional and then national coverage. America's Most Wanted planned a segment. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children added Brittany to their database and began producing age progression images. The first week ended without recovery. The white van remained unidentified. Brittany Harper had vanished from her front porch in a 7-minute window on a Tuesday morning, and despite the immediate response, despite the hundreds of hours of investigative work, despite the search teams and the dogs and the helicopters, there was no trace of her. What no one knew, what no one could know, was that less than 3 hours from Meridian, in a rural area outside Mobile, Alabama, a man named Leonard Frost had added a small, terrified girl to the hidden structure behind his property, and the distance between where she had been and where she now was had already grown too great for anyone to cross. If this case has found its way into you already, if you feel the weight of that September morning and the question that no one could answer, then stay with us. Because what comes next is 18 years of searching, and 18 years of silence, and the single moment in 2014 when a university intern made a phone call that changed everything. Dwight Van became the centerpiece of the investigation for the first 3 months. Detective Marsh and the FBI task force compiled every registration record for white vans in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Tennessee. They cross-referenced them against owner names, addresses, and criminal histories. They identified and interviewed more than 200 van owners, service companies, contractors, delivery drivers, private owners. Each one was accounted for, alibied, or cleared. The logo or lettering that the dog-walking witness had mentioned was never confirmed. Different witnesses described different things. One thought it might have been a company name. Another thought it was just decorative striping. By December 1996, the active search had contracted. The command center was dismantled. The FBI maintained involvement but scaled back personnel. Detective Marsh kept the case as his primary, but he was alone in this. The other investigators had moved on to new calls. False leads came and went with cruel regularity. In January 1997, a child's body was found in a wooded area in Kemper County, 40 miles from Meridian. The call came at 3:30 in the morning. Michael and Denise Harper drove to the sheriff's office and sat in a waiting room while forensic examiners worked. The body was determined to be that of a different child, a boy, unrelated to their case. The relief was not relief. It was simply the continuation of not knowing. In March 1997, a woman in Hattiesburg called the tip line saying she had seen a girl matching Brittany's description at a Walmart. Officers responded. The girl was identified as a local child. In June 1997, another sighting in Biloxi. Another false match. The Harper family fractured slowly under the sustained pressure of ambiguous loss. Michael continued working third shift, sleeping through the days, existing in a separate temporal space from his family. Denise took a second part-time job because sitting still was worse than exhaustion. Marcus, the oldest, became quiet and angry in the way that adolescent boys become when grief has no outlet. Tanya, 10, when Brittany disappeared, stopped sleeping well and started failing classes. They did not move from the house on Magnolia Street, though the porch where Brittany had last been seen became a place none of them used anymore. Detective Marsh worked the case for 7 years. He retired in 2003 with Brittany Harper's file still open on his desk. He handed it to a younger detective named Carla Simmons and told her, "Don't let this one die." She promised she wouldn't. The years accumulated. 1998, 1999, 2000. Each September 17th brought renewed media coverage and fresh appeals. Denise appeared on local television every year on the anniversary, holding the same school photograph, her hair graying at the temples, her voice still steady. Michael stood beside her. They said the same things. "We have not given up. We are still looking. If anyone knows anything, please call." In 2003, age progression images were updated. Brittany at age 14, Brittany at age 16. In 2006, Detective Simmons reopened active investigation for 6 months following a tip that a girl matching Brittany's description had been seen working at a truck stop in eastern Louisiana. The girl was located and interviewed. She was 18, had lived in the area her entire life, and had no connection to Mississippi. Simmons closed the lead and returned the file to cold status. Michael Harper died of a heart attack in 2009. He was 53 years old. The funeral was held at a church on 22nd Avenue, and among the attendees were officers who had worked the case in 1996, FBI agents who had driven down from Jackson, and Mrs. Eloise Crawford, who was still living on Magnolia Street and who told Denise at the reception that she thought about Brittany every single day. Denise did not cry at the funeral. She had learned over 13 years that crying used energy she needed for other things. She went home to the house on Magnolia Street, sat on the couch in the living room, and looked at the photograph on the wall. Brittany at age 7, smiling with the gap in her teeth, and said aloud to no one, "I am still here. I am still looking." The case was not closed. It was simply waiting. Leonard Frost was 52 years old in September 1996. He had been born in rural Alabama in 1944, the second of 4 children in a family that moved frequently and left few records. His childhood was marked by neglect and minor criminal behavior, theft, truancy, a pattern of avoiding school and authority. He enlisted in the Army at 18, served a single term without distinction, and was discharged in 1964. He worked intermittently over the following decades: factory jobs, construction, long-haul trucking, never staying anywhere for more than a few years. His criminal record began in earnest in 1979 when he was arrested for attempted sexual assault in Mobile, Alabama. He served 3 years of a 7-year sentence and was released in 1982. In 1987, he was arrested again for indecent exposure and served 11 months. Upon release, he moved to a rural property outside Mobile, 11 acres of pine woods with a single-wide trailer and several outbuildings, and registered as required under Alabama's newly implemented sex offender laws. He lived alone. He kept to himself. He drove a white 1984 Chevrolet van with hand-painted lettering on the side that read, "L. Frost, Handyman Services," though he rarely took jobs after 1990. On September 17, 1996, Frost had been in Meridian, Mississippi, approximately 90 miles from his property, ostensibly looking for work. He had driven through residential neighborhoods in the southern part of the city, slowly, observing. He had seen a small girl sitting alone on a porch on Magnolia Street. He had circled the block once, then parked near the corner and waited. When the woman on the porch 3 houses down went inside, Frost walked quickly up the sidewalk, smiled at the child, and said he was looking for a lost dog, and asked if she had seen it. Brittany stood up to help look. Frost took her hand, walked her quickly to the van, and drove south out of Meridian before anyone noticed she was gone. The property outside Mobile was isolated, set back from a dirt road, invisible from the nearest neighbor. Frost had been preparing for this. He had built a small cinder-block structure behind the trailer, windowless, with a heavy door that locked from the outside. He called it the workshop. It was not a workshop. Brittany spent the first 6 months in that room. She was told that her parents had died, that she would never see them again, that the world outside was dangerous, and that he was keeping her safe. She was 7 years old. She believed what she was told because 7-year-olds do not have the tools to disbelieve adults who speak with authority. Frost was not kind. He was not gentle. But he was calculating. He did not draw attention. He kept the property maintained well enough that it did not invite inspection. He registered with local authorities as required. He reported to his parole officer monthly. He passed drug tests. He was, on paper, a compliant, low-level offender. Brittany, who Frost renamed Sarah and insisted she call him by that name and no other, grew up in isolation. She had no schooling beyond what Frost taught her from old workbooks he brought from thrift stores. She had no friends, no doctor visits, no contact with anyone outside the property. She learned to cook, to clean, to stay quiet when told. She learned that resistance produced consequences she could not manage. In 2002, when Brittany was 13, Frost decided the cinderblock room was no longer sufficient. She was older, stronger, more capable of drawing attention. He added a second structure, a larger shed with a loft space, better insulated, with a small window he covered with plywood. He allowed her limited movement within the fenced area behind the trailer. She could see trees. She could hear birds. She could not see the road. He told her that police were looking for her, but that if she ever tried to leave, she would be arrested and sent to a worse place. He told her that her family had not wanted her. He told her these things repeatedly until they became part of the architecture of her mind. Frost's parole officer visited the property every 6 months. The officer stayed in the front yard, looked at the trailer, asked Frost routine questions, and left. He never asked about the structures behind the trailer. He never went past the tree line. In 2008, Alabama transitioned its sex offender supervision to a new statewide database system. Frost's file was transferred digitally. Critical details from his 1979 and 1987 arrests were truncated in the transfer. His risk level was downgraded due to a clerical error. His parole officer changed 3 times between 2008 and 2014 as the mobile office experienced budget cuts and turnover. By 2014, Brittany Harper, still called Sarah, still on the property, was 25 years old. She had lived in captivity for 18 years. She had no identification, no social security number, no record of her existence beyond the memory of a family in Mississippi who had never stopped looking, and a case file that had grown cold. What brought her back into the world was not heroic investigation or forensic breakthrough. It was a graduate student at the University of South Alabama who was assigned to review old sex offender compliance files for a criminal justice research project, and who noticed that Leonard Frost's address had listed the same property for 22 years without a single compliance violation, which was statistically unusual for someone with his history. The student mentioned this to her supervising professor, who mentioned it to a contact at the Mobile County Sheriff's Office, who sent 2 deputies to conduct a welfare check on May 3, 2014. Deputy Marcus Reeves and Deputy Angela Torres arrived at the Frost property on a Saturday morning in May. They had no warrant. This was a compliance check based on a university intern's observation that someone with Leonard Frost's history should have had more documented interactions with law enforcement over 2 decades. They knocked on the trailer door. Frost answered, calm and unhurried, and invited them in. The front of the trailer was neat. Frost was cooperative. He answered questions about his registration status, his employment history, his health. Deputy Reeves asked if anyone else lived on the property. Frost said no. Deputy Torres asked if they could look around the property. Frost hesitated. Then he said it was private property and they would need a warrant. But Deputy Torres had been trained to recognize when someone was protecting something. She noted the hesitation. She noted the quick glance Frost made toward the back window. She made a note in her report. The professor pulled the research notes and found something that had not been highlighted initially. In 1996, Frost had been stopped for a traffic violation in Meridian, Mississippi, in September. The stop had been noted in his file at the time, but never followed up because it was routine. He found the description of the white van. He looked at the vehicle registration for Leonard Frost in 1996, white 1984 Chevrolet van. He called the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. Within 48 hours, a multi-agency task force had assembled. Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, FBI, Mobile County Sheriff's Office, and the Meridian Police Department. Detective Carla Simmons flew to Mobile. She brought the case file. A search warrant was obtained on May 7th based on the vehicle match and Frost's proximity to Meridian in September 1996. Agents executed it at 6:30 a.m. on May 8th. They found Brittany Harper in the shed behind the trailer. She did not know she was Brittany Harper. She told them her name was Sarah. She was calm, not hysterical, and answered questions with the flat affect of someone who had learned that emotional displays produce consequences. When asked who she was, she said, "I am Sarah. I live here. I help with the property." Frost was taken into custody immediately. He did not resist. He said nothing. Agents photographed the property, the cinderblock room, the shed, the plywood window, the makeshift living spaces. They collected evidence, Brittany's clothing, old workbooks with Sarah written in them, Frost's journals documenting 18 years of captivity. DNA testing confirmed identity within 24 hours. Fingerprints taken from Brittany at age 7, stored in the case file since 1996, matched. On May 9, 2014, Detective Simmons called Denise Harper. She said, "We found your daughter. She's alive." Denise Harper flew to Mobile on May 10, 2014. Brittany, who was still processing the information that she was not Sarah, that her mother had not died, that she had been 7 years old and not younger when this began, was in protective custody at an undisclosed location with FBI victim specialists and trauma counselors. She had been told that a woman named Denise Harper was her biological mother and that she was coming to see her. Brittany had no memory of Denise. She had no memory of Michael, of Marcus, of Tanya, of the house on Magnolia Street. She had fragmentary sensory impressions, a magnolia tree, a front porch, the color purple. But these did not attach to narrative. 18 years is a long time when it begins at age 7. Victim advocates were present. A therapist was present. Denise was prepared by the FBI for the likelihood that Brittany would not recognize her. Brittany was brought in first and seated. She was 25 years old, thin, with braided hair that had not been cut in years. She wore clothing the FBI had provided. She looked at the door and waited. Denise came in. She stopped just inside the room. She looked at her daughter, at the woman her daughter had become, and her hands came up to her mouth, and she made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a word. She said, "Brittany." Brittany looked at her. Denise crossed the room slowly. She knelt in front of the chair where Brittany was sitting and took her hands and said, "I am your mother. I have been looking for you for 18 years. I never stopped." Brittany looked at her hands and Denise's hands. She said, very quietly, "I don't remember you." Denise said, "I know. That's okay. We have time." They sat together for 2 hours. Denise showed her photographs, the house on Magnolia Street, Michael and Marcus and Tanya, Brittany at age 7 in the school photograph. Denise told her what had happened, carefully, with the therapist's guidance. She told her that Michael had died, but that Marcus and Tanya were alive and wanted to see her. Brittany asked, "Did you really look for me?" Denise said, "Every single day." Brittany cried for the first time since the rescue. Denise held her and did not let go. Leonard Frost was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, sexual assault, and multiple counts related to the 18-year captivity. He was tried in federal court in Alabama. He pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He died in custody in 2019. The state of Alabama conducted an internal review of its sex offender supervision program. The report found that budget cuts, inadequate training, and high caseloads had contributed to the failure to monitor Frost adequately. Several officials were disciplined. Reforms were implemented. Brittany Harper chose to keep the name Brittany. She spent 2 years in intensive therapy. She reconnected with her family slowly, with Denise, with Marcus, with Tanya. She met nieces and nephews she had never known existed. She learned to navigate a world that had changed completely since 1996. Cell phones, the internet, social media, all of it was new. She moved to a small town in Louisiana in 2016, away from the media attention, and found work at a library. She did not give interviews. She did not write a memoir. She chose privacy over exposure, which was her right. Denise Harper still lives in Meridian. She kept the house on Magnolia Street. She tells people who ask that her daughter is safe and that this is the only thing that matters. The white van was never found. Frost had sold it in 1998 and it was scrapped years ago. The 7-minute window between 7:51 and 7:58 on September 17, 1996, remains the moment when everything changed and the moment that could not be undone. Brittany Harper was 7 years old when she was taken from her front porch and 25 when she was found. 18 years is a particular kind of theft. It is the theft of a childhood, of a family, of the ordinary progression of a life. What remains is what was recovered. A daughter returned to a mother who never stopped looking. A case file that went from cold to closed. A woman learning to build a life from materials she did not choose. This story is not about heroism. It is about persistence that looks like ordinary repetition. A mother calling a tip line every year. A detective handing a file to a successor with the words, "Don't let this die." A graduate student noticing an anomaly in a database and mentioning it to someone who could act. Sometimes the answers are hidden in plain sight, behind a property line, behind a system that stops looking because it assumes compliance. And sometimes the only thing that brings them forward is someone refusing to assume. If you are searching for someone, or if you have information about a missing person case, contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST. Every case is still open until it is not. Every year that passes does not erase the possibility of return. Brittany Harper came home after 18 years. The magnolia tree on Magnolia Street still blooms white every spring.